So we'll crack on. The first topic is the Peacock project update, isn't it? I think. Is somebody talking? Who's talking?
No, first is the infrastructure funding and financing update.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to find the latest thing on my new screens. All right, so go. Who's going to introduce this topic, Lucy?
I am. Hello.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Great to be here today and to have a briefing session with you all on the infrastructure funding and financing and the Rotokari detailed business case. I'm just going to introduce a couple of people to the call that will chip in as we go along. So external people that you might have met or maybe haven't. I've got Andrew Ricketts from PwC. He's leading the financial and commercial cases of our business case and also helping pull together the substantive document. We've also got Alistair Gray from Gray Matter. I'm sure you all know Alistair, so we'll be able to chip in on the management case because he's leading that. And then Greg and I will lead the rest of the slides. And we've also obviously got Blair here who can answer questions as well as the sponsor of the project. So the purpose of the session today, I will share the screen with the slides, but the purpose of this session is really to give you all the, sorry, I'm just trying to get the slides up. Can you see slides there?
No, it's there's a black bit in the middle.
Oh, strange. Is it? Can you see them now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So the purpose of today's session is basically to give you all the next layer of detail on the mechanics of the infrastructure funding and financing. And then also I really want to make sure that you're all happy with the way that I'm leading the detailed business case. I just want to take you through what's going to be in there so that you can give me your views on, is that the kind of thing that you're looking for? Am I missing anything? Just to make sure that when you do receive the detailed business case, it's what you're expecting and you're happy with what you're going to see. So I am going to hand over now to Greg, who will go through the mechanics of the IFF, and then I'll take over for the actual explaining the business case.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Good morning, Mayor and councillors. Lucy, shall I share my screen so I can
go on.
Navigate?
You go.
What can you see there?
It states. Page published.
Yep.
What's that, Lucy? Is that the one?
Yeah, the slides. The slides.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so today, so we've been asked, and part of this is to go into a bit of the detail. So we've had, there's been a number of briefings and reports go up, and so today we'll sort of dig a bit further into the detail. So how is this IFF to be structured, and where's council's role, and sort of where does it fit in with the government's broader ambitions. So sorry, Lucy, just want to double check. Are you looking at 3 red boxes? Because I've got 2 screens and I want to make sure.
Yeah, it's the national context slide.
Perfect. Okay. So as you'll all be well aware, the government's introduced its urban growth agenda, which has 5 pillars to it, and the infrastructure funding and financing is one of them, and it's sort of its banner tool is the IFF tool. I'm just getting a bit of feedback here.
Yeah, sorry, I was going to say we could hear something else.
So what is the IFF? It's an off-balance sheet tool which may be available for territorial authorities, growth councils in particular, which allows them to upfront fund substantial infrastructure projects, growth projects, and without running into problems if they're having problems, as all growth councils do, with their debt revenue and other financial constraints. And in effect, what it does is it goes to the private markets to get funding, capital funding, sets up what's like a company and a special purpose vehicle, which then has the responsibility for recovering the money and building the infrastructure in partnership with the local government. So this is just a bit of an illustration of how it works. The numbers are they're example numbers, but they're sort of about the ballpark that we're looking at in Rotokauri. So what you'll see here is the total cost of the infrastructure, 450 million. As I said, it's just an example number, but and if that's unachievable for the local authority, then this IFF opportunity allows them to tap into third-party financier, so that's your market, sort of merchant bank, private equity money, through a special purpose vehicle. In this example, 100 million, and then obviously the amount that the council would have to fund is reduced, and the money from the special purpose vehicle can be used to fund the infrastructure projects. And look, within this council funds, that sort of means related to council, so it's not the council funding all of this. This is, in this diagram, we've got DCs, private developer agreement, so developer contributions and rates, subsidies like the government NZTA subsidies. So that's sort of the basket of things that would fund the balance. And just go into a little bit more, this is some more detail about how the mechanics of the IFF and the funding work. So you've got the special purpose vehicle again here. The special purpose vehicle, the governance structure could have representation from private stakeholders, MB, CIP, council, developers, or financiers. So there's quite a broad set of possibilities there as to who could sit on that. You'd expect that we, being the council, would want representation on that. And basically the special purpose vehicle borrows from the investors, which is the grey box at the top, drops down, funds the infrastructure projects, and then the landowners and future residents receive the benefit of that infrastructure to the extent that they can subdivide and realise the value of their land, and they make an annual payment back to the special purpose vehicle. And council will administer this, but it will not be responsible for it. That's the SPV's responsibility. And then out to the side here, we've got the council, which is collecting its usual rates and it's what would be reduced DCs, because what we've basically got is you've got the capital, and if it's either funded by DCs or the IFF, it can't be, you can't double dip. So that's why you get reduced DCs.
Do you want to take questions as you go? Or thanks, Greg. Can I just ask two myself, and then I'll take questions from anyone else as well. So this enables at that investor box at the top, people right now in this current situation, for us to take advantage of very low interest rates, which the banks are trying to do to stimulate the economy. Is that right? So somebody would be a good time for this kind of vehicle to come on board from a point of view of interest rates, or does it make no difference? Oh
no, it's definitely a favourable time to invest in, to use capital investment. Yep.
And the other question is, we commonly use bonds for risk, to manage risk, financial risk, cash risk of a project. I know Rotokauri bonds have been part of the conversation, without going into details, but it's been part of it. Would this reduce the necessity for extensive bonds, or make no difference to that?
Alistair or Andrew, can you give an answer on that bond question?
I think the bond would be an alternative funding tool, and then the provisions of the bond would determine whether it achieves the off-balance sheet objective.
Yeah.
If it was more of an equity type bond or some kind of convertible note, then that could achieve something similar. But if it was a debt instrument, it would actually depend how the LGFA classified it, because it may well just classify it as debt and not achieve that off-balance sheet objective.
Yeah, Paula, David here. It's also important to note that low interest rates are available through the LGFA if we were to go down an on-balance sheet route. So the low interest rates access is not just an off-balance sheet.
No. I was just thinking, I suppose, without giving anyone's details of some of the potential developers and what they've seen as barriers to cracking on right now with their development, if you like, and cash is and bonds were one of the barriers, and the DCs were another. So this reduces the DCs, which I think is excellent, but it spreads it over time, I suppose, through repayment in a different way. But the cash bonds, that's what I was just thinking, seem to be in some instances a barrier to them being able to use their capital to invest right now. Does that make sense? And
yep. So me, Paula Blair here. So like I think the advantage of what Greg has outlined here is that the structure does take some financial burden off the developers. In other words, their upfront development contributions levies reduce because the cost of the infrastructure or portion of infrastructure is spread and paid over time by the future landowners, future residents. So to the extent of your question, absolutely it is helpful to that extent. And I think the second thing is the special purpose vehicle and the way it would raise funds from the market. It would be quite an attractive proposition for people to invest into, in other words, to lend money to it, because effectively it's a long-term lending arrangement, and there is a desire for a number of people to invest in infrastructure long-term. So it does provide for the market a place where they could put money for a long period of time with some understanding and certainty as to what they're investing in. So there is a double benefit there.
Okay, and so there's a win-win from the point of view, as David says, we get access to low interest rates, they get access to low interest rates, it's off balance sheet, reduces their development contributions, right? Am I right with all those? So are there any disadvantages to this? Or does it look as good as it is?
We've got a couple of slides with the pros and cons. So,
okay. Any questions from other councillors while I'm here? No. Carry on. Okay.
So I'll just explain a little bit about how. So they, in order to do this, they have a policy, right? So it's like a development contributions policy. We identify beneficiaries, we identify the costs, and you set it up so that the beneficiaries pay who benefit pay over time. So that policy is written and owned by the SPV, and council's role in that is to collaborate on developing it, and they'll obviously ask our advice and we'll be closely involved. But ultimately, it's their policy and they decide on it, which means they also deal with challenges or objections or the inevitable problems that come up with any sort of broader piece of policy. So that's one thing to consider. Our role is simply administrative as far as collecting the levy. We collect it because we're just in the best place to collect it because we're the local authority. And I think Councillor McPherson has asked us several times about how do we make sure that people know exactly what that money is for and why, and also that they're made very well aware, anyone buying land or property in the area knows that they're going to be having a levy on their land. So that's part of that part of the council's and its administrative role, and there's that important responsibility to make sure everyone knows exactly what's going on and what they're up for. But ultimately, the policy itself, it'll be like a DC policy, it won't be as sort of long and complex, but it'll be something like that, and that's owned by the SPV, and it's their responsibility to make sure that stacks up legally and all the rest of it.
Okay, thank you.
Council's role in this,
sorry, Margaret.
Sorry, thank you. Would there, if I understand this correctly, does that mean that the levy could potentially be included on a title?
Yeah, that's still it's still not certain. So that at the moment, it's not mandatory that it does, but it's so there's two things. There's one about the visibility, and I think there's a strong desire to make sure it's very visible, whether it comes on a limb. But as far as it being an encumbrance on a title, I don't think that's the current intention. But there's still to get to the point where you basically couldn't avoid knowing it if you bought a property. I think that's the intention.
Okay, yeah, well, even a limb, yeah, that would be so that it is highly transparent and presumably, well, I think it's pretty obvious that would transfer with the sale, and so that obviously the new owners would still understand, okay, we've got so many years left on this to pay down this levy, and everyone knows what's going on. Cool, thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
The council's role. So some of this is still emerging and to be fully understood, but generally it's pretty clear. Three main roles: infrastructure, governance, and administration. So on the infrastructure side, I won't read all these out word for word, but council's an interested party in the procurement, design, and specification. We inherit the asset, so we get the there's the O&M, the operation and maintenance of the asset. And as far as governance, there is something that the council, elected members yourselves should, and we submitted on this, is keep a bit of an eye on is to what extent can or would the government put in place an IFF regime, and compared to the council's support for it. So at the moment, effectively, it seems highly unlikely that they would impose an IFF levy without the full cooperation of the council, because, just collaboration and it would just be very difficult to work if that was the case. But and with the key developers as well. So you need to have the buy-in to make this work of both big developers in the catchment and the council. But at the moment in the legislation, the vetoes are around the asset, the assets themselves, so the technical nature of the assets and whether they meet our standards, which Alice still can talk about. And the second one is around affordability, which is a limited sort of veto or a limited approval right of the council. It's not, this isn't affordable, we don't accept that. The wording at the moment is around, will this effectively cause the council problems as far as rates defaults, because the levy means that overall that property is unaffordable. So that's something to bear in mind. And then as far as governance on the SPV, we expect that the council would have representation on the SPV. And then administration, as I mentioned, will have some administrative responsibilities, such as collection, invoicing, billing, that type of thing. And we can recover those costs to the SPV. So there shouldn't be additional cost for council, just some responsibilities.
Greg, can I just ask a question on that?
Yes.
You ask a question, then I have cash as well, Ryan.
Okay, just on that rates default you mentioned, if the rates default is part of the SPV, then the liability or risk sits with that entity, doesn't, and only the council's rating component would default into council's normal default processes.
Yeah, so that affordability, that's like a gateway to having the IFF recommended to the minister, like an approval initially, and then any default or legal challenge or any dispute about the level of the levy or the way it's deployed is the responsibility of the SPV.
No, I'm not talking about that. Once it's already up and running, if there was a rates default, there'd be two potential rates default, one on the SPV and one on councils. a rate default on the SPV is the responsibility of the SPV to pursue, not councils, and it's their risk.
Correct.
Correct.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. Kesh.
How much influence, or if any, will the SPV governance group have on council's infrastructure projects?
Good question. Alistair, do you want to sort of explain how, under an IFF, how it differs as far as Kesh's question there? Under an IFF or under regular infrastructure construction?
Yeah, so the governance framework hasn't been finalised, but the key thing is to make sure that council standards are completely clear and that there's no wriggle room. There's always tension between developers and councils in terms of the level of infrastructure that's provided. And for example, we're already in discussions with the developers up there about the width that's necessary for extra width for cyclists and pedestrians to be kept in separate paths, which the current plan standards don't provide for. So I think it would be a risk if the program, or if the schedule for the development was accelerated a lot and the infrastructure standards were uncertain. But as long as the infrastructure standards are certain and fixed as part of the agreement, then council's safe.
Got you.
Did that answer your question, Kesh?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. There's no more questions right now. Thanks.
Okay. How much is the levy? For the Rotakari growth cell, based on the modelling to date, the levy suggests about $2,000 per house, per new dwelling, and that would provide about $100 million worth of infrastructure funding. There's a bit of a table at the bottom there which just sort of shows as interest rates increase, you get less. There's obviously the finance is more expensive, so the levy would increase. And so at about a $2,000 levy, at 5% interest rate, over 30 years, that at a net present value, that's about $28,000. So what that means is that in today's money, a $2,000 levy over the 30-year period can fund about, just short of $30,000 of infrastructure for each property. Maybe I'll just leave it there and ask is there any questions on that? Because I know
there are a couple of questions. Thanks, Greg. I've got Sarah and then Ryan. Sarah.
Thanks, Paula. Sorry, it was just actually on the one before that. But the SPV, what is the governance structure around that? And is it something that if you did have a lot of defaults or any issues around that it would go under? What are those risks around there?
No, I don't think it can go under. It's
right.
Effectively government. It's a government entity. So.
And who's on the governance kind of at that governance level? Because you talked about the council having representatives, but who else would be representatives there?
Yeah, so I don't think they've been entirely clear as to how that would be set up, but as I mentioned, there's sort of a combination of the council, government representatives, and big stakeholders in the catchment. Lucy, have you got a better clue on how the representation is in the SPV?
No, I actually had a chat. We did a workshop with the Department of Internal Affairs on this as well, who are obviously drafting the legislation. And this, to be fair, the SPV is a part of it that is still an unknown and still being worked on. So we are just, we're saying that it's likely that we would have a seat on that as a key stakeholder, plus other key stakeholders, and then the various government officials and agencies. So that bit of it is a little bit of an unknown right now, but as it evolves and as we know more, then obviously we will share that information in future briefings and reports.
Right, yeah, and because there's similar vehicles overseas, I presume, so that we might have some idea of what those look like, and this might end up being kind of similar.
Yep, absolutely. It's modelled off overseas models and tailored for New Zealand. So the broad structure of it is, it's a known quantity. But some of these things like, who sits on the SPV board, and I guess if you want to sit on it, how do you, to what extent can you make sure we have representation? There's a few things in here, like any new complex thing, where it's not certain. And so I think our job, one of the jobs for us, is to make sure we come up to the elected members and just make sure we raise things that we're, make sure we have the right voice and we push the right points. And one thing, obviously, like governance and representation is really important. Another thing is the gateway, to what extent can council say it does or doesn't support the levy, and can they, stop it if it's not, they don't want it. So those things are still, evolving a bit. So we're definitely going to keep those right up at your attention level to make sure you've got a chance to have a say for us on that.
Councillor Sarah Blair here. What I would also just say to that point is that there's different phases in terms of the SPV as well. So initially there is establishing and then building the infrastructure, and then there is, as the growth cell develops and completes, and then there is ultimately just effectively a financing vehicle, which is just collecting revenue. It's done all the building, it's developed the subdivision. So it may be that the governance structure also evolves and changes over time, and as more SPVs are established around the country, you may find that these move through different stages in terms of how they're governed as well.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. I have a couple of questions. Ryan and then Margaret.
Thanks. Greg, I guess we'll see more detail when that Rotokauri business case comes out. But it's not a get out of jail free for developers, is it? They've still got to have skin in the game. It's that sort of win-win-win. Have you seen any of the numbers in terms of the DCs? Are they likely to be equitable with other DCs around the city, or would there be a softening because of the IFF?
Yeah, I did those numbers a bit earlier on, and the DC went from something like 65 to 30K, so about halved, and then that's effectively swapped out, and the IFF funds it in the at about halved.
So 30 grand for DC is probably slightly good compared to areas across the city. So if we sort of ratcheted that up a little bit, that would by default lessen the levy burden on the end user as well, potentially.
Yeah, so I guess that comes down to how much of the IFF funding do you want to tap into, or do you need to tap into? So I guess in theory, if you said, well, we don't want 100, we want 75, then your DC would be a bit higher and your levy would be a bit lower. And I think the business case will explain that well as to what are the benefits and what why certain levels of funding and what does it provide you, etc. But in principle, if you use less of the IFF, your DC will be a bit higher and your levy will be a bit lower.
Which could get passed on at the front end, where the IFF gives people the option of sort of paying it off over time, perhaps a bit more. Would each precinct, if you like, in terms of using this model, have to go through elected members to sort of set or establish that matrix of costs?
So that's what the SPV does, is it's their calculation, their policy. So they are ultimately the ones who set those charges, but councils, are the key stakeholder, in this process and development. So we have been working closely with the government, and they've been taking a lot of advice from us and seeking out our information. But ultimately, the SPV owns that levy.
Yeah, but it would have to come through council surely at some level to have comfort across the setting, given that we're a party to it.
So that's the key question about the extent to which council, or what level of approval does council have of the levy. So in the legislation at the moment, it has to tick the asset, the infrastructure off effectively. So it has to approve of the infrastructure and all of the associated things that go along with delivering that. And then it has to endorse on the level of affordability. And it's a bit broad, the how they're describing in the legislation affordability. So that's there is a question mark there about, I mean, effectively, if the government, in theory, if they wanted to land an IFF levy, they don't need the council's explicit endorsement after they've got past the asset endorsement. But it's really set up so that the council needs to, approve of the levy. That might sound a little bit contradictory. So in effect, the council needs to approve the levy, but in the legislation, you can see that the government's given themselves a bit of room to, push something through if they really want to.
Yeah, thank you.
I think really just to add to that point, I mean, the reality is, whilst there are those key two tests, the IFF and council are so intertwined in terms of development and infrastructure and how infrastructure links into the rest of infrastructure and upsizing and structure plans and all the other sort of development considerations to proceed with SPV that didn't take council on the journey would just be simply unworkable.
Yeah, and also just to add to that as well, from the experience of working with CIP, who are pulling together their business cases for any IFF proposals, it's very much a collaboration with council and key developers. So just from an experience of working with them, if council were not supporting something, it's just very unlikely that they will progress with it, just from seeing what they've been like with key developers and things. Yeah, it's very much a collaboration.
Thank you. You done, Ryan? Yep.
Yes, thanks.
Margaret?
Thank you. I really like the sound of the model. That collaboration and having developers at the front end around the table sounds awesome. Just Greg, the way you were describing or even predicting what different SPV, I'll call them boards, will look like. I've just done a little bit of Googling, and obviously the government's done that before. So it's not as if at Milldale, so it's not as if we're starting from scratch. So they've got some model to work from, and I don't know whether how successful that model was or not, and you may very well know. But my question is, would each development or each growth cell or growth project have a separate board?
It may do. They're being very flexible about the SPVs. I mean, there may be an SPV for construction and an SPV for financial. And I mean, I guess it's just possible that you could have the same SPV sitting across multiple IFF deals. I'd expect they'd be different. But yeah, it's pretty flexible. As far as the success of Milldale is successful, they've had some glitches, but everything has glitches. It's also easier because they've got one developer that owns all of the land. And so it's really a deal between the council and one developer, and they're living all of the catchment. So, but yeah, you're right. That was the start of this IFF concept.
Okay, cool. It just highlights to me the importance of that council representation on any board as well, and sort of just thinking along the same lines as Ryan, that it's really important that we have the right people around that table and that the communication is really open and free-flowing, obviously, between the two entities.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's front of mind for us at a staff level. So agreed.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, I think I've got a few more extra hands. I think Sarah's next, Cash, and then Ewan.
Sorry, no, I left my hand up.
Okay, Cash, is your hand a fresh question? Yep.
Yeah, it was just the point about house and land being X amount cheaper. What control do we have that? I mean, what stops someone from pricing it at normal market value?
The market, hopefully. So, I mean, I guess it's a good economic question, because you effectively take a buyer has the opportunity to buy two properties. One has an IFF levy on it, the other one doesn't. So obviously, the one with the IFF is more expensive. So then it's how much do they discount the price? You know, in a market, I mean, if the purchase price is going to be the same, they're just going to buy the one without the levy. And the economic analysis that we've got is that they'll partly price it in, so it'll partly reduce the purchase price, but probably not all of it in terms of the present value. So that's sort of our understanding, and you know, it depends a bit on the circumstances too.
So but technically, no one can control that apart from the market itself.
The purchase price is a market. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Market.
Ewan.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Paula. Look, this may be a silly question. I'm just trying to get my head around from a strategic viewpoint. Currently, we have 4 major growth areas, and council has committed a lot of spend for infrastructure that enables those growth areas. Under SPVs, do we not run the risk of other developers in other areas deciding to launch their development that is totally funded by an SPV vehicle? And potentially, if the market doesn't take up a surplus amount of houses and properties that those projects and our 4 current fronts are producing, don't we run the risk of, in the 4 areas that we're currently funding infrastructure with the old model that still sits on our balance sheet, that assets are unutilized, and as such, we're not gleaming the DCs that we need to pay that debt?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think the council, I mean, in the lead up to a growth cell opening, you know, council has, you know, such the dominant, you know, role in that. So when you go through zoning and structure planning and, you know, you have gateway infrastructure. So in fact, a developer sort of, you know, applying for an IFF and opening up a growth cell against our wishes that causes problems, you know, for other growth cells we've invested in, I just don't think can happen. And also, just us working closely with the government, I think it's just very, very difficult for someone to come in the side and effectively open a growth cell in our city without effectively us being really on board with it.
Okay.
But then more broadly, like, you do have to ask the question of the city needs to ask the question, if it opens another growth cell, is it diluting its investment in other growth cells? So that is an important question, and that's a question we've asked ourselves in the business case.
Can I ask Blair to respond to that question also from the point of view, because I think you raise a good point, Ewan. We know that outside the expressway up the northeast, there's a potential large development, right? So what would the impact of that be, and how would we deal with that through future proof? If Blair's there, could we look at it from that lens as well?
Blair is making coffee by the looks of it.
Oh, all right, we'll come back to that, because I think the thread you're going down is interesting, Ewan. Carry on.
I've got one further question, and it's one on in the current 4 growth fronts we're charging ahead with. Is there an opportunity, and I hate to use this word, but I'm going to pivot and use some of the pivot at pace, to use the SPV mechanism to reduce the amount of infrastructure capital spend we would require now? So it's a slightly different variation of my question. My first one was about new areas of development eroding confidence in areas we've already undertaken. The second question is, I'm just thinking, we've got these 4 fronts. Yeah, I think.
Even like, for example, refinancing, say, the HIF in Peacocks, or refinancing something that we've already got planned, or something that's already underway.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a possibility. We've investigated that, or we're investigating Peacocks as far as doing that. So is that a possibility? Would that work? What's the benefit? And talking with CIP about whether they think that that's a possibility. So the Peacocks one has, in fact, because of the DC issue down in Peacocks, where they want to, pay under an old policy for, where there isn't Peacocks infrastructure in Peacocks, that's sort of closed the door on that at this point. So it's still a possibility, and at the moment it hasn't got traction. But in theory, yeah, it is possible to refinance or introduce an IFF levy into already planned infrastructure.
Just to add to that as well, Councillor Ewan, I think the legislation is purposely very broad, so it can be applied to many things. But again, back to the collaboration, it's very much a case of, do key stakeholders in those areas, would they want that, and working that through. So yeah, it's broad that it can be applied to many things, but it's just about, do people want that?
Thank you.
Blair, did you hear the question about alternative growth cells undermining the outcomes from the existing growth cells?
No, sorry, I was just on a phone call. So I'm assuming Greg tackled that one. Sorry, I didn't hear that.
No, we were wondering from Ewan, do you want to rephrase that question? Because I thought it was a good...
I think you articulated it much better than me, Mayor Paul.
I'm not sure. So the idea that if there's enabled new growth areas that the city hadn't predicted or planned for, right, would it then have a negative impact on the existing zones that we are planning for and that we have future funded? I think it's the tenure of the... And I made reference, Blair, to the fact, for example, we know there's a huge development, potential huge development outside the expressway on the north east of Hamilton, something or somewhere else that came in. What would that do to our growth outcomes?
So I guess there's a lot of levels to this answer, but in simple terms, Mayor Paula, an IFF or SPV scheme can only work where other elements to the growth development area are in place. So you can't just propose an SPV when there hasn't been the structure planning or the integrated catchment management planning, the district plan work done for a growth area, because this is a financing vehicle, but you still need the planning layer to be in place. So to that extent, there's a level of sequencing and timing which comes through our own wider growth planning work. But I'd also would say that one of the intentions of the IFF scheme is to enable more land areas to be developed, to provide, I guess, greater supply of developable land to the market to over time provide a more affordable mixture of development solutions. So that is the intention. So there is an element of more supply will have an impact on end prices to help with that housing affordability. So there's 2 parts to it. There is a greater supply, but equally for a growth area that we hadn't contemplated, that hasn't been through the planning process and isn't zoned, you can't just stand up an SPV overnight. Council has to do that other work. If that answers your question?
That answers my question. Does that help with your question, Ewan?
Yeah, it helps formulate things for me. Thank you.
All right. No more questions at the moment. Thank you.
Okay. Now I'm just looking at the clock. What about 15 minutes? So there's a section on risk here that Andrew wants to talk us through. So I'll just have a quick go through pros and cons and then move on to the risk section. So
thank you.
I think I'm not going to read through all of those, but I think we've sort of covered them. The biggest pro really is the opportunity for us to expand the city and deal with growth in a way that's funded outside of our balance sheet, and the flexibility to do so. So, along with that, comes most of those benefits. And the cons are around, well, who's affected if you do it that way versus VCs or rates, and some of the complexities. So if there's any questions about any of those particular pros and cons, otherwise I'll just jump through to risk and let you introduce that to you.
I don't see any hands up, so thank you.
Okay, I'll pass the baton.
Oh, apologies. I do now see a hand. Maxine.
Thank you. Look, just one really simple question, actually, from the end user perspective, I think. I think one of the last things in your cons was the cost would be higher to provide it through an SPV rather than through council directly. And that would affect the end user, presumably, the most. That's a correct assumption to make?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and would there be potential kickback from, from ratepayers or future residents in terms of their appetite to see, additional cells or infrastructure funded in such a way?
So first part, so it's sort of in the margins. So the reason it's more expensive is there's council administrative costs to be recovered, and there's some costs associated with the SPV and the financing. So that pushes it up, and it also depends on how the interest rates and the capital costs can be negotiated. I didn't quite get the second part of your question about would landowners and how they feel about other or growth cells using SPV.
Yeah, I just how the market might react if they notice that in the first time we start to use it, that there is this impact on the end user, and their real appetite to be able to buy into that for future development.
Yeah, so, and I think if I'm understanding you correctly, I think that's part of the options available in the market. So, you open up a new growth cell that has, new potential, new properties that people can choose from, and they need to choose into having a levy on their property, obviously, because if they're buying into that growth cell. And then sort of to Blair's point with bringing on new supply, they've got options in Peacocks, they've got options in the infill area and other areas, and in the IFF cell, say in Rotokauri as well. So I think that's just part of people's choice.
I think, Councillor Maxine, this is part of that wider government desire to try and break the current cycle of how land is developed, and so whilst there may be some, as the cons say, there slightly higher cost for the SPV in terms of financing cost, administration cost, it may be more than offset by greater competition in the land market, which brings competition and potentially theoretically better options for people to acquire land for development and users. And I think that's where this tool for us, we look at Rotokauri as our example, but actually if we think beyond Rotokauri and think to other growth areas in the future, where, to Councillor Ewan's question, we can think about the IFF as we start to think about those growth areas and the planning for those and the district plan, the structure planning, and we can build it in from the very start. It's a different proposition to apply it to something that's already been zoned and sort of half developed, and more powerful for us.
Okay. I think we'll go through the risks, so we've been a crucial part of it, and then we'll sort of wrap up any final questions, if that's okay.
Can you see the risks there?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. I think Lucy does want to quickly run through the content of the business case as well, so I'll try and be quick on risks. Effectively, some of my colleagues at PwC assisted with this, and what we did is we tried to utilise the work and the learnings from the Peacock process, which is obviously further advanced as a greenfield cell. And then we got roughly about 25 people across the organisation, and we attended a half-day workshop, and collectively we looked to identify risks, identify risk mitigation, and then we also looked to rank the risks. And then we sort of tried to transpose those into the impact on the 4 wellbeings, which will form part of our approach in the detailed business case. And I've got a snapshot of them there. There's obviously a lot more than that, and that feeds into the risk register, and then the risk register will turn into the risk management plan as we progress through the project. So that's a very quick overview, because I know Lucy wants a couple of minutes. Is that enough, or is there any questions?
Yeah, we've got some questions. I have one question following on from what Maxine asked the first time. I think it says markets do not accept the levy. There's a strategic risk. In actual fact, for the end user, the purchaser or the renter of the house, is this still going to deliver some potential more affordability because they can get in and the risk and the financial risk is spread over time for both the developer and the purchaser, presumably through levies or however they do that. Is this going to help deliver our outcome of more affordable housing or more choice in the housing market that gives some affordability?
I'll comment first, and then Greg might want to chip in. I think one thing that'll help will be the volume or the supply of developable land. So in theory, if we have more land, more sections available, more competition in the market, then that can obviously help with affordability.
Okay.
Anything else, Greg?
I think we looked at some of the affordability. So I think the average mortgage payment per year is something like $30,000. So the levy on top of that, in terms of your overall, the costs that are associated with your housing, it doesn't push the dial a lot. So hopefully the supply side increase would outweigh, the small increase in your overall affordability. And as always with housing affordability, it's hard to know. But I think that's the two main things from my perspective.
All right, thank you. Maxine. Hand up, accidentally. Margaret.
Thank you. It's similar questioning, really, that if the market doesn't accept the levy, I think for me it comes down to basically affordability at the coalface. So I think it's important, or how do we ensure that the end user doesn't receive, or even the developers don't receive, a double whammy where their DCs stay relatively high and the levy is high as well. I think that's a critical point. And then if that balance is right, then the end user should be able to take on a property or purchase a property that's got an acceptable level levy. Otherwise, if we get that balance wrong and that formula wrong, it's going to be a big risk. So how do we maintain that, or how do we strike that balance? I suppose it's negotiation.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Margaret. I think one of the key roles through stakeholder engagement, that one of Lucy's slides coming up, is around the market and actually hunting down council's role about providing the right level of information, and that can go right the way through to real estate agents and future residents. So I think we can't obviously impact the market dynamic between buyer and seller, but we can get information out in the public domain, and we can make it easily accessible.
Yeah, I think my big concern is that the end user doesn't want to be seeing council as, oh, here we go, here's another levy, or here's another tax, we get whacked with more. I think if we can use our levers properly and back off some cost for them in some way, or reduce some cost for them in some way at the same time as adding a levy, that's going to be more palatable. But if it's seen that we are just adding another cost on top of another cost, on top of another levy, or on top of another rate, yeah, that's going to do our reputation in.
Yeah, and we need to make sure that the public understand what it actually is. I think actually Councillor Ryan just made a good note to me, which it's like a DC mortgage. So at the moment, Rotokauri is kind of stopped because of DCs. The DCs are really, really high. They've kind of stopped. So we've got all this gateway infrastructure there. We've got a future growth cell that's been planned for decades, really, from the start of it. How do we realise the value of this growth cell? If DC, I mean, there are other things causing problems, but they're making it harder. But DCs is one of the big ones. Exactly. Let's use this tool to spread all the costs out, get the infrastructure in, and realise, the value of our assets we put into date. Tarapa bypass, the big water pipes and stuff. So agree, it is kind of an expensive sell because of its typology and the stormwater there. But this is a way to realise the great amount of value that is there for housing. So yeah, we'll still be a bit expensive. And as far as the public, there's no additional levy. It's just take a bunch of costs and finance it a different way. So we need to really make sure that they understand that the council's not just adding another cost to them, and they don't really understand why.
So I've obviously missed the point then. I thought that the levy was going to be attached to the purchase of a property over a certain time frame. So if they're paying rates and they're paying a levy, are you telling me they're not going to be paying a levy?
No, so the numbers, so approximately you would have paid 60,000 in DCs. But with the IFF, you'll only pay 30,000, so you'll pay.
Oh, right. So that's the developer. Yeah, that's the developer. That's not the purchaser.
Yeah, correct. And hopefully it's priced into the property. And yeah.
Okay.
And the key thing, I think, Councillor Margaret, is that our job with our communication strategy, it's probably a slide I'm not going to get to, but making sure that the whole market is informed, so that particularly if people want to buy a house there, that they're well informed that there is a levy on a house there, so they can make a decision whether to buy that house or not. So I think our role is really crucial with our communication strategy, is just making sure that that whole market is informed, consulted, and that we work through it with them on that.
Okay, yes, thanks. Lucy, sorry, can I go back to your grid? I am really confused now. You just said that the DCs will be included in the purchase price, so that'll be passed down to the purchaser, yes?
That's generally the case, yes.
Correct. So the purchaser will pay their rates, they'll pay the costs. Well, first of all, they'll buy the land, and then part of the DC will flow into that purchase price. Then they'll pay rates on the property, and they'll pay a levy for a time frame, will they not?
Correct. But the DC will be substantially less.
Yep. So the purchase price theoretically should reduce.
Should do.
Yeah. Okay, cool, thanks.
Just a quick question for me. I see then Maxine's got a hand up, and I will give those that can stay on the opportunity to continue with the questions. I might have to duck out at some point. In the compliance and regulatory, next time we talk about this, can we talk about how we reduce some of those risks identified in there? Because we're not unfamiliar with potential delays for environmental issues, endangered species. That can all be sorted in prior negotiation with mitigation, etc., can't it? Largely, we managed to do that a little bit with Amberfield around the bats, etc. I know Rotokauri has some sensitive environment, and the swale and things like that. I would like to understand how we play in that space to get a win-win for developers by, being expedient about how we front end some of those compliance and regulatory risks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can answer that one, Mayor Paula. So this was something we might not have time to go through in detail today. But
no, I don't need it today, but
yeah, one of the things that I've done with the business case, which I wanted to give you all an outline on, is that we've actually slightly changed the template, if you like, that would normally be used for business cases to try and help with exactly this. So what we've done here, can you see the contents of the Rotocarra business case slide?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so if you see number 4 there, the wellbeing case, ordinarily that would just be an economic case, but what we've done is change that out so that it's actually a full well-being case. So for example, your point on environmental, there's a full environmental well-being case being put forward, so we'll understand the sensitivities, we'll understand what are the environmental risks, what are the sensitivities, and what are the potential solutions to that, and we're actively working with key stakeholders to make sure that we are, as the phrase that we like to use, game ready, so that we understand the risks, we have a plan for them, and then Alistair in the management case can link that into how we implement and deal with that. So I'm hoping that the introduction of this wellbeing case covering all the 4 wellbeings will really help with exactly what you've just said.
Oh, thank you. Now that looks a step forward. So for example, new technologies or engineering technologies could be explored earlier rather than being an area of contested area at the end. So
yeah, and I think one of the things we've learned with this business case process, it's really looking at it from a wider wellbeing point of view rather than just focusing on the strategic infrastructure, looking at how we're building that community and linking in very early with all those key stakeholders for various things. So we're bringing them along on a journey and really developing a growth cell from the start with all key stakeholders actively involved from the beginning.
Okay, thank you. I'll take one question from Maxine, then we'll carry on. I'm going to have to go in 10 minutes, but that's not to say that other councillors might have a few more minutes, might not have a few more minutes. Maxine.
I think Ryan's also got his hand up too, Paula, and I didn't want to hold up the conversation in other important areas. Just to Lucy's point about the communications with future residents and residents, that they like to be able to see value for it and have an understanding about what it is that they're paying that levy on. And so those communications need to be really clear about not just that they have that levy, but that it's funding a particular part of being able to unlock that cell.
Yeah, this slide actually might help explain that, Councillor Maxine. So this is just a brief snapshot and an overview just to show you that we are taking all key stakeholders on board. And if you look on the prospective home buyers are in the involve section, so it's not just about informing them, it's actually involving them and making sure that they're well aware and we've taken on board concerns and views. So yeah, this really takes you on that journey from taking people who just need to be informed right through to the people we need to involve, collaborate with, empower. So yeah, that's very much part of the business case process.
Thanks, Max. Ryan. Is Ryan still there?
Sorry, did the old mute. In terms of affordability, Greg, because the purpose of this was more houses sooner. So potentially with the softening of DCs and council's costs, it could bring houses to the market at a cheaper rate, with the recognition that homeowners have the ability to pay it off over time effectively. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. So your question is, compared to the conventional way of doing it, would an IFF make it more affordable?
I'm just saying at the front end, it could actually make the purchase of the land and house softer because of the shared cost and infrastructure, with the recognition that by having that softer entry point, they get to pay it off over time.
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
And my other question is just regarding, because council's infrastructure costs will be softer because of the IFF, will their standard rates therefore be cheaper because they wouldn't have had to? That'll get reflected through the cheaper DC cost for the money.
Yeah, that's right. So DCs are charged on anything the council spends. So the council spends less, the DCs are less.
So really at the front end, all things being equal in the market, this should actually make the purchase price a lot lower. It'll just tag on, hey, you get to pay this off over time. So effectively it's getting into your property earlier. It's a bit like an HP house model.
Yeah, and the asterisk to that is, so long as the property purchase, the person who purchases the property can price in the, you know, this 30 years of levy, because people are usually not that good at pricing in, you know, long-term costs. They tend to discount them a bit, but generally speaking, you're right. Yeah, it should be cheaper because of those.
And just for the benefit of everyone, when you did that submission, Greg, you also asked the question if people can actually pay the full cost of that up front if they have the ability to.
Yes.
Put it on their mortgage so that they're not having to flag it out every year for 30 years.
Okay, yeah, no, that was, thanks Ryan, because that was really re-asked my question around affordability in a different way, so thanks for that. Margaret?
Thanks. Yeah, I think that has to be a goal for us, and we need to stick to that, because that's the whole point of doing this. We're trying to get more properties on the market more quickly, to create competition, and that should be able to drive prices down anyway. But I mean, I've seen councils plenty of times promise things are going to be cheaper, but when the rubber hits the road, no, that doesn't work. They hold on to their existing costs. So I think that has to be a major goal, and we have to stick to that. But anyway, that's an aside. My question around collaboration and involvement, I hope we would and bring in the Property Council at some point in our communication and engagement.
Yeah, correct. There was actually a new version of this which did say that there, but yeah, that whole, the legals, the surveyors, the valuers, etc. Yeah, would all be involved as well.
Yeah, okay, cool, thank you. Okay, councillors are starting to peel off, but we'll just go quickly through the next few slides if we can. Have you got two more, Lucy?
Yeah, there's just a couple. I briefly went through this, but my key point of telling you about the contents of the business case was just that as a council, are you happy with the idea of having this wellbeing case? It's slightly different than what you might have seen before with business cases, but I'm hoping that actually it's better. So it's just basically letting you know that this is very much a wellbeing case. It's not just focused on roads and swales and things. It is looking at how we build that community. And with this slide in particular, so what are the options? So we spent quite a long time actually going through what are the options for developing road to Cowrie, and we've gone backwards and forwards on partial solutions and half a swale and just focusing on the swale. But we actually discovered over time with working on the business case that there's really two options. And what you're going to end up with any growth sellers, at some point in time, you are going to end up with the infrastructure, that being strategic, local and community. You will end up with that wherever you develop. The variable is over what time you do that, and the cost to well-being of doing it over that time. So the actual options that we're going through in the business case is just two. And one of the key things here with Road to Cowrie, it would be different perhaps for other growth styles that we're unlocking from the start, but Road to Cowrie has been zoned residential, so developers are getting ahead there. So we actually are not in a position to do nothing, which might be something you would ordinarily see in a business case. We can't actually do nothing unless we went back and rezoned it, which again is not really a viable option. So what we're doing with the business case is really going into detail through each of the aspects of the business case on the do the maximum or do the minimum, which is basically do the maximum will be accelerate our timing to be more aligned with developers versus the do the bare minimum, which would be being very receptive and doing it over a slower period of time. So that's our approach in the business case, and it was just informing you all of that and whether you agree with that approach.
Thanks for that. Look, I do agree with there's a matter of equity in Road to Cowrie too. As you say, the land having been zoned residential and future expectations of landowners, we've had them come and submit last term in council, many of whom had planned many years out for the ability to develop, and I think it's only fair, to be quite honest, that they are able to develop. So the do maximum sounds like a way forward. Especially, I like your grid, the business case grid, Lucy. I like that a great deal. I hope that in that means that if they come up with alternative engineering solutions or new ways of mitigating some of those concerns, if there are wellbeing concerns, that we would be receptive to that. Times change, new solutions come to the market, etc. And that in them articulating their wellbeing case, they would start to articulate what they could do about the barriers to wellbeing.
Yeah, and our management case as well isn't just looking at how we implement the infrastructure, it's looking at the wellbeing aspects of it as well. So it is quite a different way that we're approaching the business case, but I actually think it will give you a much better and detailed story.
Yeah. And on that, I'm sorry, I have to go to travel to 11:30, but I'm going to suggest that Maxine, you just take hold of this and just chair it for me for the last 10 minutes. I don't want to extend it too much, but just allow those last few slides and questions if you might, Max.
Sure, thank you.
And then just wrap it up. Don't let it go on too long for staff's benefit, but just let you finish and Lucy, I'll catch up, or Andrew, I'll catch up with you on any little bits that I missed towards the end there, please.
No problem.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Yeah, thanks, Max.
Thanks, Paula. Thank you. Okay, I can see there's a couple of questions up there. Margaret, your hand's up again. Is that new question?
Apologies, I believe that her hand was just left up, so I'll take that down now.
All right, and Sarah.
Cool, thanks. Lucy, I was just wondering, in terms of the well-beings, at Peacock, we've had a real big focus on well-beings, including environmental well-being. To what extent, I guess, is that going to be reflected in Rotakoti? Because, we've done a lot of work around protecting and enhancing biodiversity there. And I don't know what level of significant biodiversity is already in Rotakoti. But to what extent are we looking at a kind of a protect and restore approach there?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Sarah. I think one of the best things for me personally with this business case is that Karen is my boss, so she can really feed in the lessons that we've learned from Peacock and feed those into this business case. So a lot of the approach that we've taken is lessons that we've learned on the approaches that have worked well in Peacock. So very much, that is going to be a focus going forward. And it really is, I keep saying, a well-being business case. So each of the 4 well-beings will be explained and considered in detail.
And do you know, say eventually we'll be committing, I expect, to a 10% significant biodiversity cover goal in Hamilton, and we're around 2% now, and gullies, if we restore all of them, won't bring us up to that point. So we're going to need our new growth sales to really contribute. Do you know to what extent Rotakoti will or could contribute?
I don't actually know the answer to that question. Alistair, I don't know if you know that from your Peacock mind.
So, Councillor, I think that the biggest opportunity is one of the biggest infrastructure items, the swale for the stormwater. Linking the 2 lakes is a huge opportunity to improve freshwater quality, and it's also got wetlands and habitat for mudfish and that sort of stuff associated with it. That's one of the endangered species that we've got to be careful to manage properly. So I think that green corridor is the biggest opportunity to make a difference. The rest of it will come down to the urban design and subdivision planning context.
Right, because say Peacock has the esplanade and different things. Is there any opportunity to expand beyond the swale? I guess the green infrastructure there in Rotakoti, or are we really just stuck with what's zoned and that's it?
Just now, stuck with, I think, is slightly negative. The entire purpose of the swale is to enhance.
Sorry, just
quality. The swale itself and that corridor is only part of it. All of the developments have to manage stormwater properly as well, so that there are extensive wetlands and detention ponds associated with the development, which are currently expected to be next to the swale, but could be dispersed throughout the development. I think stormwater and the stormwater treatment areas are the biggest opportunity.
Yes, yeah, no, sorry, when I said stuck with, I kind of meant just, is that our only areas of land where we can, I guess, have that, well, we've got, you know, the valuable biodiversity there potentially, but then are we able to secure any other land within that area, or is it just going to be really expensive to do that now at this stage?
Well, I think the investment in community facilities, the parks, there will be opportunities associated with those, but that'll be a balance between people diversity and biodiversity. And then again, the rest of it reverts back to the planning framework.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Thanks,
Sarah, is that get your questions to it? Yeah. Okay, Lucy, have you got some other slides that you want to work through?
Actually, basically, I've kind of gone through these now. This was just letting you know that we are incorporating that. It's very much a well-being business case. And then you'll see here under financial case that one of the things that I've been struggling with recently since all of the COVID outbreak has been we're spending obviously quite a lot of money on producing a financial case that I was worried was going to be outdated and just wrong the second that it was written, because we're aiming for kind of middle of the year for this being finished. So one of the things that we've done is the next draft of the business case is going to actually not have the financial case fully in there, but it's on hold just while we wait for like annual plan decisions and linking it in with the long-term planning. So just slightly maybe perhaps by 1 month delay with this business case, just because I want the financial case to actually be relevant and right and not outdated the second it's written. So just kind of keeping you in the loop on with the financial case on that. So I don't know if anyone's got any comments or anything about that, but it's more just letting you know that that's the case.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up. And that sounds like a very reasonable thing to do in terms of the situation that we find ourselves in and the future decisions that we're going to be making come annual plan. So I guess in terms of a wrap up and a finish, so next steps, Lucy, Greg?
So the next steps for us is, like I said, there's a slight delay with the business case, just so we make sure that we get it right. But I'm hoping by the end of June we'll have a next version of the full business case written, so that hopefully we can do a session with you on going through actually what's in the business case and collecting feedback. And then hopefully by the end of July, if the financial cases is at a point where council's finances are more certain and we can finish that financial case, I'm hoping that by the end of kind of July, August time, we'll have something that you're hopefully able to make a decision on the business case and whether you agree with developing Rotokauri based on the funding mix and options that we put forward to you.
And that business case will include the IFF proposals that may be coming up at that point?
Yeah, so we'll get to a point where obviously we're still waiting for the IFF legislation to be enacted. That's not really been delayed much, but perhaps by 1 week, which is actually great. So we're hoping that will be implemented in July, enacted in July, August. So it's quite in good timing with our business case. But then we'll get the business case to a point where we know as much about IFF as possible. But after the business case is finished, becomes the next stage of commercial negotiations with CIP on an IFF, what that actual model and agreement looks like. So you signing off the business case is subject to further CIP negotiations on the levy, if you agree that's the way you want to go forward.
That makes very good sense. I see your hand up from Margaret.
Thanks, Maxine. Lucy, I see do maximum accelerate timing aligned with developers. Point 3, acquire land for community facilities and development, etc.
Yeah.
After you've just pointed out that the Rotokauri business case has got pays attention to the well-beings, cultural and environmental, where is the acquiring land for environmental facilities.
Yep, that's a good point.
Capability.
Yep, that's a good addition for us to consider. That's probably a wording thing, but just the context of that is basically, we were discovering when we were going through the options that some community facilities, for example, community infrastructure, you don't put in until a certain point. It doesn't make sense. But one of the key things that the community group has said to us is that actually acquiring the land for community or environmental facilities and so on is a really good thing that we can do from the start, and then bring them online, if you like, when it reaches the appropriate point. So adding into that environmental considerations is a good addition. Yep.
Thank you. Yes, if it means buying land to plant trees for some sort of reserve, the earlier we do that, the better. So thank you. If you could change that wording, that'd be great.
Yeah.
And that fits in with the Waikato spatial plan as well, the green and blue, whatever it's called.
Networks, yeah.
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, Margaret. Thank you for that. And I think in the interest of time, if Lucy, this is the last of your slides, unless there's anything that you want to finish with a wrap up.
No, I've given you an update on the timings. This was just explaining the idea of the timings of the two options. The thing is, you will get to the same endpoint. It's just over a significantly different time frame. So that was just getting across that point. But what I will say is we have kind of gone through quite quickly the actual contents of the business case. So if you have any questions, then please feel free to email me or call me, and then we will do a session once we've got a next full version of the business case together, either another briefing or drop-in session or some kind of workshop for you to feed into that and collate your feedback on it. So that will be our next step with you, and then I'll keep you updated in strategic growth committees and so on as well.
Wonderful. Greg, was there anything that you wanted to finish with?
No, I don't think so. No, that was good. It felt like we had some good questions, and hopefully elected members got a bit of a better understanding.
Yeah, I get the feeling that it's permeating through people now, and that those questions really help to be able to level off everybody's understanding. So thanks everybody, thanks staff for your contributions today. We look forward to the business cases coming forward, and being able to really be able to meet council's obligations around the expectation for developers and future residents out in the area. Kia ora, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.